Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Sirhan on X, live from Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States. Hope everyone has themselves a wonderful 12th of December 2024. And notice out of nowhere, I got a bunch load of new followers and a bunch of new people is watching the show this evening. A little humbled. I don't brag about this. You guys can do the bragging for me. Anyone that knows me knows I don't brag about numbers or anything like that because that's how I am. Uh, for you newbies out here, just to give a brief synopsis, I take a boatload of sports topics and make one show routinely between 30 minutes and an hour, somewhere in between. I cover a whole bunch of areas. I have a bunch of followers in the sports communities, most notably the NFL, college football, baseball, and of course, my supposed specialty, which is boxing. And I use this platform to talk about a historical perspective of the boxing world because, as we know, the sport who follows boxing as much as I do knows has a bit of a luster loss. I put things in perspective for some of the newer, younger fans out here to when it comes to the world of boxing, or just a little bit. So, actually, one of my what I like to do in the wintertime because everybody complains about the cold. I always have this nice little wood burner stove going here during the middle of my telecast. I just show it off a little bit because it's one of the coolest things I've ever done. Actually, I shared a story for you newbies. I'll go ahead and share it again before I get started. It was back in 2003 over here in basically the greater Cincinnati area where we had a not just a crazy amount of snow, but it was ice up to where we had no electric for about a week. And I basically had to use this to survive. I did all my cooking for breakfast, lunch, and dinner on this thing. Actually, it turned out to be pretty good. I'm not going to brag about how good I cooked, but I managed to survive that week. Actually, I remember because before it came, my grandma lived just about 10 minutes from where this was, and I had to go get her so she had a place to stay and keep warm during that 1 week period where we were freezing cold. So, but yeah, this thing keeps us nice going and smooth through the wintertime. So this is what I use. It saves a lot of money in my heating bills. I don't have to worry about paying the electric in the wintertime. So it's one of the coolest things I ever had to put together. Probably one of the most smartest things I've ever done. You know, but hey, it works. If it works, keep at it, and that's what I'm doing. Now let's get this thing started. Hope everyone's had themselves a wonderful day. Gonna touch my the NFL schedule here. I'm gonna pick the Week 15 games, and I'm gonna stick to the playoff implications because two-thirds of the games this week is basically absolutely worse than mediocre at best because it's not worth wasting the time. So, of course, the big one tonight is actually a pretty good one. The LA Rams and the San Francisco 49ers. Both teams clinging on to a spot in the playoffs, which basically they're going to have to win the NFC West because the NFC North is going to probably send three teams. You have the AFC East winner, the NFC South winner, and maybe Washington probably gets one of the other spots in the NFC playoffs. So these two are probably just trying to hang on. Rams 7-6, the 49ers 6-7. It's been a very, very trying year for the 49ers with the injuries and, of course, a couple of players, most notably Shadavius Ward and Trent Williams, having lost their children this offseason. I'm not a father, but I can relate to any parent who has to bury a child. I can tell you this: it's one of the most dark things anybody have to go through. And I always, you know, keep a thought and a prayer for those who had to bury a child. And I don't want to imagine what Shadavius Ward and Trent Williams are going through with this. It's sort of been a trying year. Of course, they had a bunch of injuries, most notably to their running backs, Christian McCaffrey, and now Jordan Mason is out. Of course, Brandon Ayuk is out for the year. Rams had a bit of a trying year with their injuries, mainly their two-star receivers, Cooper Cup and uh, Puka Nacua was out for a period, but now they're back. Um, think going into this game, the 49ers had the first game under control, but in the typical Kyle Shanahan manner, Kyle Shanahan doesn't know how to close games out, and it happened the first time. And I wouldn't be surprised if it happens again because the 49ers, they're going through a whole lot, and you can only go through so much. Sort of shame because Brock Purdy's had himself a pretty darn good year. I mean, someone actually posted his numbers on one of the sites, and I got a chance to look at it. For a guy who's supposed to be a game manager, he's actually had a pretty darn good and solid year. So I th- and the Rams, uh, They had a late pickup with Emmanuel Forbes off the waiver wire from the Commanders to help that secondary out. He's supposed to play some snaps, I believe. Uh, and the second thought, I'm probably going to take a slim nod to the 49ers at home. I think they're going to muck it up and just find a way to get this W. It's going to be a clash of the Titans because both teams are desperate for a playoff spot. They're basically on the edge right there. And we know the trying times San Francisco is going through. I think they find a way to sneak out a W tonight, some way, somehow, with everything they've gone through, which basically says a whole lot. We consider losing their top two running backs, a top receiver, and two of their players not there because of circumstances beyond their control, and very, very unfortunate. But I think they're going to find a way to muck it up and get a win on their home field against a division rival. So give me the 49ers, albeit by a hair. Now I'm going to go to the early games. Again, I'm going to stick to the ones that have the playoff implications because the early games it's absolutely a bit of a treading water for the most part. Washington at New Orleans. New Orleans not going anywhere, but Washington fighting for one of the last playoff spots. On my shows, I harked about when the Week 3 Monday night matchup when Washington came to Cincinnati. I was there in person. I was just thoroughly impressed with Jaden Daniels and what he was able to do. And he continues to show why he, in my opinion, is the rookie of the year. Although I think Bo next to a couple of others might challenge it and have come on as of late. But I was impressed with how the guy plays in the pocket, how he's mobile, how he can find find receivers. I know they sort of tailed off a little bit, largely because Cliff Kingsbury can't offensively coordinate a game properly. I pinned that more on him than Jaden Daniels. I expect Jaden Daniels to continue here and go to New Orleans and lead Washington to a win. I mean, the Daniels to Terry McLaurin duo is one of the better ones in the league. It's not talked about enough. Not at the level as a Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase or anybody like that, but still pretty formidable. And I expect them to go to New Orleans and handle business there and continue their march to the playoffs. I just want to remind everyone, I just ask again for anybody, my NFL followers out here, how many guys had Washington finishing with a winning record this season? Thought so. So if everybody wants to go ahead and say the roof is falling off of Washington, remember, they're still cleaning up the residue that was left in the Daniel Snyder era, which was just a hot mess for I don't know how long. But they're starting to trend the right direction. They made the perfect draft pick in Jaden Daniels. They're probably going to get one of those playoff spots. They're probably going to get that ninth win on Sunday, and I expect them to get one of the last NFC playoff spots. So give me Washington on Sunday for that one. Kansas City at Cleveland. Kansas City, we know, likes to theoretically or perception-wise, likes to make things closer than what they are, at least perception-wise. I can tell you this, one issue, if there's anything, is that left tackle spot because Wanya Morris and the rookie, I can't pronounce the guy's name, can one of my Kansas followers pronounce it for me down the line, that's how he gets basically burnt from time to time. I know, but apparently they got DJ Humphries to start, so that should probably solidify that and it better because on the other side is, of course, Myles Garrett of the Cleveland Browns, who's every bit of the problem in the as an edge rusher as anybody in the league. But the game is going to be one on the other side, basically the Cleveland offense versus the Kansas defense, and nobody talks about the Kansas City defense enough. I mean, Trent McDuffie's as good as anybody in the secondary. We could argue probably the best cornerback in the game. Of course, a defensive front with guys like George Kalafkis, Chris Jones, among many others. Linebacking crew is good. Safety duo is good, especially when you have Justin Reed back there. And I think that's going to be the difference. I think they're going to slow down the Cleveland offense and force Jameis Winston to throw a couple of interceptions, cash those into touchdowns, and I expect Kansas to escape Cleveland with the win as they're trying to hold off Buffalo from the number one seed in the AFC, which I think they're going to wind up getting in the end. Another one with playoff implications is Miami at Houston. Houston's line has sort of tailed off a little bit. I still think C.J. Stroud's a very darn good quarterback, but it's been a trying year with a bad offensive line and having, Stephon Diggs out for the year. His top receiver, Nico Collins, was out for a period, but they're still going to win the AFC South almost by default and probably get a home game there. And they're playing a Miami team who's just barely hanging on for one of those last playoff spots, and I mean barely. I think in this one here, I think Houston is going to probably find a way to knock Miami closer to in the elimination mode because I think yeah, Miami is just a mess right now. I know they got Tua Tagovailoa back, but it's probably a case of too little, too late. I think Houston takes this one at home. I think this one's going to come down to a game-winning field goal between these two teams. So give me Houston at home. I say this one almost by default. Baltimore at the Giants, not necessarily for playoff implications, but Baltimore's trying to stay pace with Pittsburgh for the AFC North title. I read a wild stat where Lamar Jackson is like 25-1 against the NFC, but the one loss against the NFC is against the New York Giants when Daniel Jones was at quarterback. Actually, I remember that game. They were up 10. Lamar Jackson throws an interception, which turns into a touchdown. Later on, I guess a Giant defender punched the ball out of Gus Edwards' hands. And of course, they came back to score another touchdown, another turnover on downs. Saquon Barkley kneels it at the 2-yard line, and the Giants run it out. It was like 2 years ago, I remember. But it's not going to happen again. I think that Baltimore means business. They had the bye week to totally refresh. I expect them to go to New York and handle business. You know, they're going to probably find a way to make it closer than it needs to be. But I think if you're Baltimore, you just find a way to get out of there with a W. That's all that matters right now. Because you're trying to keep pace with Pittsburgh for the AFC North title. And, you're right behind it there because Pittsburgh already beat you once. But I expect you guys to handle business. Good one on the late docket. This is Tampa Bay at the LA Chargers. Tampa Bay first place in the NFC South versus the Chargers vying for one of the AFC playoff spots, which I think they're going to wind up getting anyways. And I think they take a step closer to clinching it here. Didn't necessarily look all that, laid an egg for the most part at Kansas City. Of course, didn't help that the ball dwinked off the upright and in for Kansas City to clinch the AFC West title. But now that's out of the way. They can refocus and just getting a playoff spot. And I think they find a way to get the job done at home. Tampa Bay, I think, is going to play pretty darn good to try and hold off Atlanta for the NFC South title. Remember, they got to stay ahead of Atlanta because Atlanta swept the season series. But Atlanta's just fallen off the map a little bit. But even then, I think just for this week, I think Tampa Bay won't beat the Chargers. I think the Chargers come closer to clinching a playoff spot, and they win this one at home. The real good doozy is in Detroit. This is Buffalo and Detroit, the Bills and the Lions. Possible Super Bowl preview. Guess it's a Super Bowl everybody wants. Don't know if we're going to get it. It's the one everybody wants. And I think with this one here, it's going to come down to the quarterback play. Who do you trust more, Josh Allen or Jared Goff? I mean, Josh Allen was just a man amongst boys last week, but it didn't help that his defense just absolutely laid down or rolled over for the Rams. And I expect the defense to play better this week because they couldn't be any worse than they were against the Rams, could they? I expect Josh Allen to play as well, but I think he'll play just enough. If you ask me who I would take between the two quarterbacks, it's a no-brainer. It's Josh Allen. I think Buffalo gets the job done. All out now, I think this one's going to come down to a game-winning field goal either way. But give me Buffalo on the road as they try to keep pace with Kansas for the number 1 seed in the AFC and try to hold off Pittsburgh and Baltimore for that 2 seed. And speaking of Pittsburgh, of course, it's the all Keystone State battle between the Steelers and the Eagles. Of course, it's supposedly rumored this week that George Pickens' hamstring injury is a little more serious than it was reported, so he might be out. But they did get Alex Highsmith back last week, which helps their pass rush. And they're going against the Eagles team with all of a sudden some weird drama between Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown. It's like we're revisiting Donovan McNabb, Terrell Owens again. Do they really like each other or not? I mean, of course, everybody says all is good, but what they say on the camera versus what goes on behind the scenes are two different things. But it is what it is, and we know it's two different things here. Of course, they have the premier runner in the NFL right now in Saquon Barkley, but they're going against a Pittsburgh defense who knows how to shut the run down. I think it's going to come down to the quarterback battle. Again, I know the quarterback battle debate is overblown, but on this one here, Russell Wilson or Jalen Hurts. Hurts has played a little better in recent weeks, but ever since Mike Tomlin made the decision to start Russell Wilson, that offense has been different. I think another down to the wire game of the Keystone State. I expect a lot of Steeler black and gold in the Philadelphia at Lincoln Financial Field with their waving their yellow towels, and I think they're going to uplift Pittsburgh to a bit of a shocking win because I'm surprised how many people actually how one-sided in the pick segment is that people think Philly's going to win. Not going to be that one-sided as people think. I think because Pittsburgh knows they have a chance to basically seize control of the AFC North that they paid us to pull the win here. Remember, it's part of their difficult stretch where everybody thought they were just going to fall off the map. But here they are, top of the AFC North. And I said all along, and I've maintained, as I said several times in these shows and on the X Spaces and all the podcasts or whatever, they managed to win the AFC North. I would crown Mike Tomlin the NFL Coach of the Year. I think they take a step closer and find a way to get this job done in Philly. It's going to be a good doozy because Keystone State, interstate battles, especially in the Keystone State with those two teams, with the records they have and the teams they have, it's going to be a clash of the Titans. It's going to be a pretty darn good one. But give me Pittsburgh on the road. I just not really on the road because Pittsburgh, being in Pennsylvania, is going to have a Steeler following. Going to Philadelphia with all the black and gold and the orange towels, yellow towels waving, excuse me. And the Sunday night game is Green Bay at Seattle. Seattle trying to hang on to the NFC West lead. Green Bay fighting for one of the playoff spots. Seattle's defense playing significantly better. But Jordan Love and the Packers offense, as we know, is a different animal. And I expect Green Bay to go on there and handle business in Seattle. Geno Stone at times can be hot and cold. He's played pretty well in recent weeks, but whether he's always had struggle with being consistent with it. But I expect the Green Bay Packers to go into there and find a way to get the W on the road over there because they're going to get to 10 wins. And think about this crazy stat for just a second. The Lions, the Vikings, and the Packers, if Green Bay pulls this off Sunday, which I said they will, are going to have 10 wins and basically have a playoff spot clinched. That's crazy. I mean, usually 10 wins gets you a division at this point, but when you consider that Green Bay's in the same division as Minnesota and Detroit, I mean, they're still somewhat in the running for the NFC North title because only 2 games back. But of course, all the tiebreakers go to Detroit in every way possible. So I expect Green Bay to get the job done and make the clinch a playoff spot. Speaking of Minnesota, they have Chicago on their at home this week. It's between, of course, Caleb Williams against a vicious Minnesota defense, and I expect Brian Flores to dial up the defense and make life heck for Caleb Williams in this one. This one's going to be close. Give me Minnesota at home. They go to the playoffs. And my upset of the week is going to be the other Monday night game, the Falcons and the Raiders. Raiders, I think they're going to shock the world because the Falcons are just falling on hard times right now, as Kirk Cousins has just been absolutely dreadful in recent weeks. Raiders basically have nothing to play for at this point. They're going to come with a nothing to lose attitude, and I think they stunned the Falcons in that other Monday night game. So that is my NFL picks segment. I'm leaning toward the playoff implications. There's 3 or 4 other games that have no implications at this point, not worth talking about. But speaking of teams that aren't in the playoffs, of course, the one here in Cincinnati segue to what I talked about. Of course, for my followers in Cincinnati, you know the story here that took place on Monday night. It was Joe Burrow's house broken into, and I guess there was an adult model who can't keep her clothes on, her legs closed for whatever reason when she's on the internet in the house making the phone call for burglary, which I don't know nobody fully knows what the story is yet. There's a full investigation going on. But Joe Burrow addressed it yesterday, and he seemed one of the rare times I could really say this. He seemed a little disturbed by it, and I understand it. The home, anybody that holds a home or whatever, a private, housing, whatever it is, a home or a, condo or an apartment or whatever, supposed to be one of the most sacred possessions you have, and where you keep everything private. And I'm firm of one of the ones that athletes deserve to have a private life outside of the glitz, the glamour, the fame, and the fortune of the athletic field. I could relate to this, understanding how certain famed boxers live. Of course, here in Cincinnati, we haven't had a polarizing famous athlete like this in quite some time. And we know what happened Monday night. His house got broken into. Of course, there's all the jokes about, no Super Bowl rings, MVPs, Lombardis. Yours truly being one of them, likes to just flop that out for fun. But in terms of the serious matter, it really bothered Joe Burrow and When Joe Burrow's at the press conferences, you can almost see hardly much really bothers him because he talks straightforward and honest and down to the point. When he brought it up, you could tell how emotional he was about it because his private life and his privacy. I mean, I agree with it. It was violated every single way possible and imaginable. I mean, athletes or anyone in a line of work has to have a work-life balance. I could have a segment on this in one of my shows down the line about the importance of a work-life balance because that's what I had to learn myself. Same goes for athletes, especially we talk about famous athletes like him, who does a great job of keeping his personal life private as much as possible. And basically, when this happened, it was something that touched his soul, and you can almost see it at the press conference. He was very, very emotional about it. Basically, he knew he had to address it because it was basically across the news all over the place. I mean, he sort of felt uncomfortable mentioning it because he likes to keep his personal life private. Now, of course, the bigger issue during this press conference was there was a coward named Kelsey Conway, who's one of the Cincinnati cowards who wanted him to talk more about it. And Joe Burrow basically did the right thing, basically told him, I'm not going to talk about it. But of course, Kelsey Conway is a coward, as we all know in Cincinnati. But because Kelsey Conway felt the need to be a coward, she wanted to press on, and Joe Burrow didn't want to deal with it, which was a smart move by Joe Burrow. Because this is something about boundaries. Once that boundary is crossed and you start to make someone someone uncomfortable like that, there's a problem. Seemed like Kelsey Conway wanted to continue to cross that boundary when she was constantly wanting to ask the questions about what happened. And Joe Burrow felt very, very uncomfortable answering them because when you're talking about a one of the most private things in any walk of life, which is an individual's personal private life. I mean, I get the same way too. If someone crosses that line and I get uncomfortable, I'm just going to walk away. Joe Burrow did that, and that was a smart thing. It speaks to the high level cowardice of what Kelsey Conway is as a human being, or how the type of a cowardice Kelsey Conway is when she does her job for the Cincinnati Acquirer, where she's just a moronic coward times 10 for many, many, many reasons. Not because of the views of the Bengals, just a bunch of other reasons I'm not even going to get into with her because I'm not giving her the time of day. But here's here's the thing. I read it on a fellow Bengals fan post, and he made a good point. This is the same area 2 years ago where there was an incident that involved running back Joe Mixon. Same thing. Because Mixon and Burrow live in that part of Cincinnati. It was basically Anderson Township. I can call it now Anderson Township because it's out there. I don't know the specifics, but I know the area is a very nice area. Which I'm surprised this stuff actually happens from someone who's worked in that area, lived in that area. The fact this came out and all of a sudden everything was out in the open makes you want, knowing that Joe Burrow lives there. Maybe in hindsight, you shouldn't be surprised that this happened because the whole Joe Mixon fiasco was a big fumble by the Cincinnati police at the time. Putting everything out there without drawing the conclusions. Then they had to do the whole thing because some kind of privacy was breached, and now we're having this 2 years later again with with Joe Burrow. So there is an investigation going on, as reported by WLWT here in Cincinnati for a very respected reporter named Karen Johnson, phenomenal reporter for Channel 5, unlike Kelsey Conway and Kay Adams. So we're going to get the details here soon. At some point, I think everybody, including reporters, beat writers, whomever you are, podcasters, live stream people, even general people like yourselves, stay away from that boundary a little bit. Athletes have private life, are human beings like ourselves, and they have a right to their own privacy and their own life as well. That needs to be respected. If this happened, okay, burglaries happen. I know that something happened over in Kansas not too long ago with Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelsey having their situation where they were burglarized. So what are we getting? What are we accomplishing by raiding the house or personal belongings or personal property of a famous athlete when there's nothing really to gain out of it? What's going to happen is someone's going to be wind up in handcuffs and is going to have to face a judge and likely going to be sentenced to some significant sentence of some sort, and that's going to be what they deserve in the end. What's going on? I know the NFL sent some kind of I guess, a memo to the teams about potential burglaries going on. things can become a little bit of a mess and a little shady. I'm just going to sit back and watch the details on this one because it's getting weirder and weirder and weirder with each passing day. But people need to start respecting Joe Burrow's privacy, especially you Bengals fans in Cincinnati, who I will unload on when the time comes, because some of you guys are about to get it. I know who some of the names are who put this thing just in the general sense of Bengals fandom out there. You're gonna get it when the time comes. I'll just wait for the details to play out. But speaking of Burrow, one of the other news here in Cincinnati is the supposed free agency of T. Higgins. Uh, hot commodity in the NFL free agent market. Probably the season if the Bengals decide not to tag him, which they have the option to tag him for a second straight year. Feeling is that's probably going to happen because you know it's that option. Whether they tag and keep him, whether they tag and extend him, or whether they tag and trade him, it's all up in the air and it's all over the place. I think I'd probably say it's a 70-30 proposition, with the 70 being him being gone, 30% him staying. I hope I'm wrong on that one because I like for him to stay. But of course, we all know he fired his agent for whatever reason. I can't pronounce the guy's name. First name is David. The issue here is that agents had issues with Bengals players and the Bengals front office and many other front offices. But he fired the agent. We'll see where this one goes. I mean, Bengals fans are trying to say there's real chance that he stays. It's going to probably take some hardcore financial specialty to make this work if they really want to keep him. But we'll see where this goes. I said, although they should have traded him after the AFC Championship game loss to Kansas City and try to yield high draft picks out of it, but they refused to go down that route. We saw what happened last year. You got tagged this year, missed significant time because of injuries to the equivalent of having a cut on your finger. But I guess they want to keep him around. If they want him and he wants to stay, they'll probably find a way to get it done. But we'll wait till free agency starts so that happens. I still say it's 70-30, 70% he's gone, 30% he stays. Probably seems likely he'll get tagged, maybe a tag and a trade to yield some draft picks out of it. But that's 2 years after its expiration date, which is the Bengals' way around here. So that covers my NFL segment of the topic, because now I'm going to segue to the college football field. Speaking of NFL, arguably the greatest coach in NFL history, Bill Belichick, was officially introduced as the coach of the University of North Carolina. Sort of strange for this to happen, but I read an interesting article from a fellow named Seth Wickersham, and he has some real outlandish takes, but I think he's onto something with this one. Maybe in case of Bill Belichick, seeing how the NFL has become and what it's become, he essentially just said, "To hell with it, I'll go to the college level and go there." I mean, his last few years in New England were basically a downturn, but that's because Robert Kraft basically set Bill Belichick up to fail, not giving him the chance to succeed the way Bill Belichick wanted to. Because everybody knows Bill Belichick would love to win of something of significance after Tom Brady's retirement. I mean, after Tom Brady left New England, back in 2020, because the feeling is, at least perception-wise, Brady was the reason for Belichick's success, which I said all along. I think it goes both ways. But for Bill Belichick, I think it's going to be interesting to see how he succeeds at this level. I know Bill Walsh tried it. And some other legendary coach, I can't think of his name, tried it. I don't remember the outcomes of it. But if Bill Belichick can make North Carolina somewhat of a respectable college football program, because that school he knows no more for college basketball given his history at North Carolina as opposed to college football, I think he's going to help maybe in his own weird way, help his legacy, maybe cement it not just as the greatest NFL coach ever, maybe the greatest coach ever at all levels. It's possible. Not saying he's going to be the result. Of course, there's the transfer portal, there's the recruiting, there's NIL and all that crazy junk that's been going on over the last several years, pay, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, Belichick's going to have to probably find his way around that. But let me just remind people, Bill Belichick has had success everywhere, pretty much wherever he went. I mean, people forget he was a 2-time Super Bowl champion as Bill Parcells' right-hand man in New York. Actually had success in Cleveland until Art Modell chose to be a coward and pull Cleveland out for no reason at all. Because I think that year they were like 5-1 or 5-2, something like that, before the announcement was made, and then the Browns just tanked. Of course, the success in New England, which is well chronicled, was was assistants, at three other levels in the NFL. So I'm thinking maybe he could transition well, but who knows? It's going to come down to how he manages all of the recruiting and all that stuff the craziness goes on in college football these days, and we're going to see just how great he could potentially be because college football is getting crazy, especially with the transfer portal as it is. And someone posted the names on it. It's absolutely wild. Maybe if anything, just by the name Bill Belichick being on that UNC staff, I think may help them get significant players to help make that college football program respectable and reasonable. So that ends my conversations about the NFL and college football talk. Actually, all football. Now I'm going to transition to a topic in baseball before I go to boxing. Of course, the big news of the day was, of course, the official announcement of Juan Soto to the Mets. $765 million over 15 years. We know why you went to New York, Juan Soto. You don't have to lie. I don't want to hear about him. You guys saying he went to the Nets because they're a playoff team or potential World Series team. I don't want to hear about him going to the Mets because they're supposed a better organization than the Yankees. He had 765 million reasons to go to the New York Mets. I think you know what I mean by 765 million reasons. It's going to cover 15 years. I said it all along. 765 million reasons for a 288 hitter who's basically mid-level at basically when it comes to fielding and not the greatest runner either. And of course, the good thing is now the Yankees can spend that money wisely on more needs than basically sucking it up to basically a mid-level player who's now gone and out for good. And basically, he came out and said he doesn't talk to the Yankees players. Newsflash, I don't think the Yankees players no longer cared about you because you walked out the door for $765 million over 15 years. New York Yankees have bigger fish to fry than you right now. You want to go to a mediocre team so you can get the bag? Your mission was accomplished. No need to lie about it at a press conference. Just admit you went because you wanted to get $765 million over 15 years. Maybe if you told the truth, people will forgive you more. You can lie all you want at the New York press conference there. It doesn't matter. Anybody with a brain knows it's because of $765 million over 15 years. That's why you went. Because I got news for you. That team you go into basically doesn't have a pitching staff worth talking about. Because let me remind you again, when they played the Dodgers in the divisional play round, the Dodgers tallied 46 runs on that team, and they still haven't fixed that pitching rotation at all. Juan Soto's not a pitcher, and he's not going to fix that. Good luck. Because not only that, the National League's going to be getting better and find a way to be better than the Mets this season. You still have the Phillies. The Braves are going to be, especially Ronald Acuna Jr. comes back. They're going to be a factor. You still have the Brewers are going to find a way. Cardinals will probably be in it. You still have, of course, the Dodgers. A couple teams out there like the Padres. Good luck, Mets. You're going to need it. I'll see you in 3 years when that player does not uphold that contract, and he's basically a mid-level player at that point. Because that's where you guys are headed with this player and that contract. Plain and simple. I don't talk much baseball, but given everybody wants to talk about this guy, I'll give you my 5 cents. I said it along. We know why he went there. He had 765 million reasons to cover 15 years. Plain and simple. Now for my fight followers here, I see some of you guys on here. The big news that broke just minutes ago before I came on was, of course, Denys Berinchyk defending his so-called belt against Keyshawn Davis. Denys Berinchyk got a bit of a late start in the sport. Solid fighter. Got the big win over Emmanuel Navarrete in his last fight. Solid performance. But that's the end game because Keyshawn Davis, I think, is ready to burst onto the scene. He did in his last fight when he poleaxed Lemos in his last fight in 2 rounds. The right cross that bent him over backwards. And I expect him to go to Madison Square Garden in February and just handle business against Berinchyk to win one of those lightweight belts. Him and Abdullah Mason, I think, are the future of those divisions. And we're looking forward to see what those guys are made of. I'm looking forward to seeing it because I think they have untapped potential, both of them. With Davis, I expect him to handle business on February 14th against Berinchyk. I'm ready to see Mason start to step up himself, and I think he will do well. But Keyshawn Davis and Abdullah Mason are the future of that division. And Denys Berinchyk is a solid pro, no doubt about it. No pushover, but he's not beating Keyshawn Davis February 14th. Give me Keyshawn Davis in that one. I think it finds a way to maybe a late stoppage or a unanimous decision. but Keyshawn Davis is going to leave New York with the belt. So that goes with that fight right there. Berinchyk not a pro, but Davis and Mason are upstarts. The other one, of course, is Floyd Schoenfeld. But good luck, Floyd Schoenfeld. You got Shakur Stevenson overseas. I wish you nothing but the best because you're fighting a dog in Shakur Stevenson. Now to my favorite part of this boxing fraternity, the historical part, because a lot of people here, when they talk about the recency bias, they don't take in consideration that some of the things that happened in the past. They think what happened today is the greatest thing boxing has ever seen. And I like to literally tell them to pause when I mention some of this because I've always said some of the legends paved way for a lot of these fighters and media people and fans like myself, which I give them their due. There's three significant ones that took place. Maybe one of the bigger ones took place at the Astrodome 43 years ago. This is between Salvador Sanchez and an English journeyman named Pat Caldwell, or Cowdell, I can't pronounce his name. This came after Salvador Sanchez train wrecked Wilfredo Gomez all over the place and was headed for a showdown with Azuma Nelson, but took a fight against Pat Cowdell as a way to stay active before the Azuma Nelson fight comes up. He shows his stuff, gets a unanimous decision win, floors Caldwell in the 15th round to retain his featherweight championship. Of course, after he gets the fight with Azuma Nelson, wins that fight in basically a fight of the year candidate, back and forth fight where Sanchez knocks Nelson out in the 15th round. And of course, the unfortunate tragedy of Salvador Sanchez months later when he was killed in a train wreck. The crazy thing about Salvador Sanchez, and I said this on a show this summer, he was slated to fight Juan Laporte in a rematch, which he probably would have handled Laporte. And he was going to probably move up to junior lightweight. And he was staring at major money showdowns against Alexis Arguello, Eusebio Pedroza, Hector Camacho, and potentially Julio Cesar Chavez at 130. That's what he was looking at. They were talking about moving up to 130 and fighting all of those guys. And the wild thing is, Salvador Sanchez's resume, as he was continuing to fight at that young age, was getting better and better and better. Because a lot of you guys in the fight community love to nitpick resumes. Salvador Sanchez's was getting better. And the scary part was he hadn't even hit his peak. And he just dusted, think about it, dusted off Danny Little Red Lopez, train wrecked Wilfredo Gomez, already beat Juan Laporte once, beat Pat Cowdell, and of course, the win over Zuma Nelson before the unfortunate tragedy. Salvador Sanchez was your perfect do-it-all fighter. He can box, he can brawl, he can mix it up. The ability to make you miss, make you pay. Great counterpuncher a la Juan Manuel Marquez, especially with a white crosser could put you on the floor. Salvador Sanchez was a do-it-all fighter and would have put a major lock on the greatest Mexican fighter of all time had this not been happening. Now, of course, always a debate between him, Julio Cesar Chavez, and a couple of others. But Sanchez was on his way to locking down the distinction of greatest Mexican fighter of all time because his resume was getting better and was going to find a way to get better had he gone up to 130 because he was staring at major money fights with guys like Arguello and Pedroza, Camacho, and Chavez, among many others. I mean, you're talking about, they say that what could have been was going to be the lock of the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. It was an unfortunate tragedy for Sanchez. That was like the next to last fight before it happened when he beat Cowdell. Tougher than expected fight, largely because Sanchez came off the emotional high after slaughtering Wilfredo Gomez, which was expected. Tough fight until Sanchez's experience took over in the late rounds. Got a knockdown in the 15th. Scorecards were a little bit closer than I had it because I had it in the area 145, 139 for Sanchez. I thought he won that thing more decisively than the judges had it, but he was a rightful winner. But Salvador Sanchez, everybody talks about all these great Mexican fighters. Even Roy Jones said it. You want to see what a great Mexican fighter was? Look up Salvador Sanchez. He was a thing of beauty. The world misses him 43 years later, and the tragedy was it just took the life out of the souls of not just all boxing fans, but more so, especially in Mexico. It was just a sad day when the tragedy happened to him. Now, of course, speaking of legendary Mexican fighters, a fighter Sanchez probably would have crossed paths with was none other than Julio Cesar Chavez. It was about 38 years ago today at Madison Square Garden on an off-TV HBO fight. I'm surprised this fight wasn't even televised. He gets a tougher than expected decision over the veteran Juan Laporte. This is in '86. Crazy thing was this fight was not even televised. Nobody even knows what the reason was. It was on the undercard of Bonecrusher Smith and Tim Witherspoon. But probably the first real test of his career, fighting a grizzled vet and Juan Laporte who brings it in every fight, backs down from no one. Closer than expected fight. Basically, Laporte gave Chavez all he can handle. Julio had to dig down, dig deep, find ways to retain his championship in a not talked about good Mexican Puerto Rican fight. Chavez being Mexico, Laporte being Puerto Rico. It was a pretty darn good clash for a 130-pound championship that doesn't get talked about enough. I mean, I thought Julio rightfully won. Could have gone closer than expected, largely because Laporte it was basically Laporte's last chance at a world title at that point. I think he fought like it. Of course, a lot of hoopla. People think that Laporte should have been given the decision. I think the judges had a little bit too wide for Julio, but I thought he was the rightful winner. I think it showed just how great Julio Cesar Chavez was about to be at that point, because he was in the middle of that 10 defense reign as the super featherweight champion of the world. You know, he had victories over Lockridge and Mayweather for the first time before he fought Laporte. You know, not the who's who in that division, because largely because that division sort of flattened out. The only guy at that time in that division was Eusebio Pedroza, but of course, not Julio's fault that fight didn't happen. But you know, one of the longer reigns of the lighter weight classes at that time, 10 defenses of his super featherweight belt before he went to lightweight and demolished Edwin Rosario. But a pretty darn good fight 36 years ago, 8 years ago between him and Juan Laporte. Another must watch. Surprisingly, the HBO decided not to televise it. It was on the closed circuit Don King Productions Network, called by the great Bob Sheridan. But he did a phenomenal job calling the fight, actually. But it was actually a pretty darn good clash. It's a must watch if you guys are into boxing nostalgia right there. And of course, the main event that night was a weird circumstance in the middle of one of the craziest things that took place. The mid 80s had a heavyweight tournament. I could bust out the whole bunch of names. Came after the end of Larry Holmes's reign when he lost to Michael Spinks. The belts were all over the place, and they were trying to have an undisputed heavyweight champion of the 3-belt era. In the middle of it, this was James Bonecrusher Smith against Tim Witherspoon. Neither guy stood out. Basically, neither guy was the particular greatest or whatever, however you want to call it. But it's a synopsis of what the heavyweight division was before the 90s came around. Belts being passed around. This belt, this belt, this belt. That's why I call them belts, not belts. But it was supposed to be a fight between Tim Witherspoon and Tony Tubbs in a rematch of a fight that took place the year before where Witherspoon got a decision. And of course, who's the middle of it? Don King. Everybody knows about Don King boxing. It reared its ugly head at a press conference just out of nowhere, where basically everyone was complaining about Don King, especially the two fighters, Witherspoon and Tubbs. Because of it, Tubbs pulled out. Entered James Bonecrusher Smith and as a last-minute replacement. And basically, he just dog walks Tim Witherspoon in one round to win the heavyweight belt. This fight not going to be talked about much in the historical sense, just largely because neither guy mounted to an all-time great. Neither guy is really remembered. The only reason why this fight was remembered was because they were in the middle, that middleweight, excuse me, that heavyweight tournament in the 80s was going to stand out for, let's see for a second, was going to stand out for the future heavyweight champion of the world. And we know who that wound up being, Mike Tyson. Because the belts became a 1-belt era to a 2-belt era to a 3-belt era. And everybody in the boxing world knows the mess of the corrupt governing bodies. This fight, basically, bang, bang, boom, 3 knockdown rule, fight was over. Of course, there's a rumors that Tim Witherspoon took a dive. He said to an extent he did because of supposed rumored faltering relationship with Don King due to Don King not upholding his end of the financial bargain. Where have you heard that one before? But it's a synopsis of what the heavyweight division was, the mess that it was at that point. Of course, later on entered Mike Tyson. He cleaned all that up. 2 months later, Bonecrusher Smith fought Tyson in a 2-belt unification, clutched his way to a 12-round loss where Mike Tyson was rewarded the winner. But the heavyweight division in the 80s hit a real dry spell. Well, first, it really hit a dry spell when Ali retired after Larry Holmes beat him in 80. And of course, it became a bigger mess after Holmes vacated a belt, got rewarded another one, lost it to Michael Spinks, and then we have chaos ensued in the heavyweight division. At least 7 or 8 guys were involved in this tournament. The end game being Mike Tyson being the undisputed champ at 87 when he beat Tony Tucker. But this fight just basically was in the middle of a wild tournament under wild circumstances, under bad business, because bodies here, last minute replacements, guys starting to see what Don King was made of, especially Tim Witherspoon and Larry Holmes, who later on rumored to file cases. Don't remember what the results were, but that's how bad the Don King's control of the heavyweight division started to get. Then, of course, we entered Mike Tyson. He becomes the undisputed champ. And we know what happened with Tyson and King down the line. It's been well chronicled enough times. More synopsis of what the 80s heavyweight division was under Don King. Chaos, mess, all about the dollars, not enough sense, because it certainly wasn't. Maybe the best thing that happened was Tyson becoming undisputed champ, because it made more sense than anything that happened for the previous 2-3 years when there was belts being passed around all over the place. Because we're about to have that again in the heavyweight division after Usyk Fury 2. Of course, Usyk was forced to vacate a belt because Daniel Dubois supposedly earned it, which he really didn't. And of course, we'll have another mess. We're not going to see another undisputed heavyweight champion in our lifetime. I've had a chance, privilege to see 4 of them, being Mike Tyson, Buster Douglas, 5 of them. Mike Tyson, Buster Douglas, Evander Holyfield, Riddick Bowe, and Lennox Lewis. And of course, Alexander Usyk, when he got this one, of course, Vladimir Klitschko tried to unify it, but the other belt wanted to be passed around because Don King tried to stay relevant. We know how the end game goes. That's why I always call them belts, because 90% of you guys in the boxing community, and I'll say this again, give way too much credit to governing bodies that you shouldn't. Give way too much credit to belts when you shouldn't. And it's the fighters that make the belts. The belts don't make the fighter. 90% of you guys in the community need to understand this. Because I was on a pretty cool podcast on last night with a bunch of cool people, and we just had basic conversations about boxing. Nothing about belts, just a sport. We need to go back to that here a little bit, because the governing bodies are just an absolute hot mess. That's why I like to call fights of the 40s and 50s the one belt era, where it was one belt, winner take all. Obviously, we're never going back to those days because it's just a corrupt mess. I mean, of course, I could point at reasons why. I'm not going to use a platform for it. You guys in the boxing community can go ahead and have at it. I'll give you my opinion on it, and a lot of you guys are going to like it, but it's the end game right now. And so that will conclude that. And on that note, I will go ahead and wrap up this edition of Sirhan on X. I'm going to see some of these real quick. I can't even turn it on here. Oh, yes, my boys. Oh, yes, put it out here. Inevitable D Block. What's up? Hey, thanks for having me on your podcast, on your spaces last night, brother. We need to do it again. I'll be busy this weekend, but I'll get a hold of you. I'll finally get some X comments here. Another thing I knew this. Ah, yes, my guy, JC. What's up, buddy? Hope you're doing well out there. Hey, I say so long. You guys want to go ahead and comment? Go ahead and have at it. I'm just getting new to this sort of thing. Good, bad, pretty, ugly. I'll take it. I'm going to put these up on here. I just want to say, all you guys in the NFL, college football, and the boxing communities, I just want to say thank you for having me back on. I was on this thing years back. It became a toxic mess when I left. Now I'm here and I'm back at it again. And this time I'm staying. I'm going nowhere. And I just want to give one shout out real quick. I'm going to see if I can pronounce his username correctly. She hosted a college football spaces last night on X. I want to give her one last shout out before I wrap it up. No, that's not it. Let's see one here. She goes by the username of Bucks Forever. Also, the tag as Carol Bucks. She's an OSU fan like myself. Just want to send this out to you if you're watching this. I enjoyed your college football spaces last night, and when you're back on it again, I will look to chat out with you and all the guys in that crew. You are a bunch of sensational bunch. Everybody I talk to, honestly. And then I'm like now start to get X comments on here because there's a while I couldn't. So if you guys want to comment, comment away. I'll give you the shout out. I'll give you the love. And on that note, I will go ahead and wrap up this Thursday night edition of Sirhan on X. Hope everybody out there has themselves a wonderful 12th of December of the calendar year 2024. I will be off the next 3 days. I have a line of work to go to. Until then, good night. Take care of yourselves, and God bless.